Good morning. I believe the last time I was here, we were in the book of Job, and so you've come a long way. I am Pastor Jeff. I am a Nazarene pastor. Have worked a long time on this district since 2010. My family is in transition, so I get to do fun stuff like this and come and preach in other places. And so thanks for having me back. For those of you who know me or know my family, we are in the middle of a move. We are building a second-story unit on top of my mother-in-law's house. And we started that last year, had an architect, found a general contractor, started the planning, applied for permits, and we finally this year got permits in March. So after only 19, 20 months of the process, we got permits and we've started, and we're about to start framing this next week. So we're in the middle of several moves, one so that our kids can start in the school that they're going to start at in the fall. So we'll be living in like a 2-bedroom apartment for a little while, and then we'll move in with my mother-in-law, hopefully between Thanksgiving and Christmas. If I see you next summer and we are still in the apartment, I also would not be terribly surprised. But that's just a little update on me, and again, thanks for having us back. Actually, can you go back one slide to the back half of the scripture that we read, because it's kind of personal. Verse 36, I felt like Curtis really asked me to preach this on purpose, because as a contemporary of Curtis, I am definitely I can't control the color of my hair. And so as soon as he asked me to read this, that was my very first thought. Cool, Curtis, cool, thanks. Thanks a lot. But as you can go to the next slide. But as we go through this particular passage, I do want to say that aside from being gray-haired very early, I'm very young. I'm not getting older at all. But aside from that, this is like a really heavy passage. And as you knew from the last time I was here, or from previous times that I've been here, I will probably leave with more questions for the congregation than I will have any answers. But I think they're really important questions, and I think this particular passage for us right now is a really, really tough one to wrestle with. We have this sort of plain reading about what it means to be people who don't need oaths or pledges or anything other than our word. And so just on the surface, we can read this, and some of us may struggle more than others with how to apply some of this stuff. How do you just tell the truth all the time? Like, is this the kind of like brutal honesty when your spouse asks, how do I look in this? Right, is that, I mean, like on a very surface level, right? Like let your yes be yes and your no be no. Do you like my haircut? When people ask me that, I just say, how do you like your haircut? Because I don't care. I mean, that's my honest answer is, I don't care about your hair. But people want to know. But I want to start with maybe some big contextual background for what Jesus is talking about and why Jesus might be talking about this particular thing in maybe the most complete sermon that we have from Jesus. In ancient Jewish times, there were lots of commandments given, and the teachers of the law sort of compiled a set or a list of things, somewhere just over 600 laws that you had to sort of obey. And when you think about like our legal code, it kind of pales in comparison to like the DMV handbook, right? Within 150 feet, that's where you can get into the bike lane. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. You don't know either. So I'm just going to say it's 150 feet. But like they were really specific, right? Like you couldn't spit into the dirt because that might till the soil, plant a seed, and that might grow. And then you were doing work on the Sabbath and you've disobeyed the Sabbath. I mean, they were really specific about some of these things. And so when it talks about oath telling, it gets into this sort of like this minutia of really what's going on in the culture. And if you know what's happening in Jesus' time, the Jews are being oppressed by the Roman government. And there's this group of people for whom the command to give the land to your children, to inherit what God has given you. That was a command that they needed to be faithful to. And so you have zealots in Jesus' band of disciples, people who really wanted to return to the land in ownership because it was given to them by God, and they were commanded to give it to their children. And this required political revolution. Now we're getting into some like real kind of oathy things, right? What does it mean to pledge or to oath? And then you have some of the more political, sort of religious talk, maybe that we're more familiar with in our day, with our politicians in our current time. And so we'll read a little bit from Matthew chapter 23. How terrible it would be for you, blind guides, who say, if people swear by the temple, it's nothing. But if people swear by the gold in the temple, they're obligated to do what they swore. You foolish and blind people, which is greater, the gold in the temple that makes the gold holy? You say, if people swear by the altar, it's nothing. But if they swear by the gift on the altar, you are obligated to do what they swore. You blind people, which is greater, the gift of the altar or the altar that makes it holy? And now we think maybe in our political time about constitutional oaths, about the oath of office, or about your sworn duty as an officer or as a member of the military. We start getting into these really necessary sometimes. I think governance is necessary. I think public safety is necessary. But you get into this place where you might now have conflicting oaths. You have what you say, I am a person of faith, someone who is to care for the widow and the migrant and those in prison. And then you have those who are there to also gather up the migrant, to provide or not provide certain benefits to widows. To put those, some maybe, who do or don't deserve to be in prison. You've got these really big structures and narratives and stories, and then Jesus says, why are you oathing in the first place? Are you not a person of faith? What does it mean for your yes to be yes to God first and only? What does it mean for you to be a person who has pledged their life to worship, to be a person of truth in your words and in the way that you live? As I was reading through commentaries and listening to other sermons about this particular passage, there was a lot of emphasis in this passage, and I think rightly so. It is very much about credibility. There's a lot in here about letting your yes be yes and you're not speaking oaths, about what it means for people to trust the church, for people to trust people of faith, for people to know that they can come to a church as a sanctuary because they believe that this is a place of safety, right? That's what we say over and over and over. And I think there's a lot of that I hope we wrestle with today and throughout the week as we think about this passage. But I think as I read it, what kept coming through to me is that this is as much a passage about our credibility as it is about our loyalty, given the context in which Jesus is speaking. I'm going to take a break here, and as you may also remember, I really love congregational participation. So I'm going to ask us to help us find ways of applying this in our own lives. Like, what are the societies, the institutions, the people that you may speak to and use oaths for? I'll give you a couple of examples. When I stood at the altar with my spouse, I pledged to my spouse. I made a promise to them, an oath to them, that I would be faithful, that I would forget when they did me wrong. That I struggle with. But I pledged it, and so I have to keep coming back to that as a reminder. And I think that, in many ways, that was a good oath. I like that oath. I want to keep that oath. And yet I have this commandment, this teaching of Jesus, that there might be a time where being faithful to my spouse or being faithful to God might require two different things. And what do I choose? And how do I choose that? And how do I communicate that? Those are real things that we got to address in this loyalty conversation when Jesus says, let your yes be yes and your no be no. To who? And when? And how? So, who do you oath to? What have you pledged? Where have you signed a contract? I leave it to you. Yeah. The Pledge of Allegiance. That's a big one. Yes. To get a teaching credential. I am, one of the things I didn't say is next year I'll be teaching 4th grade. And so I'm going through the credentialing process. And yes, you do have to sign an oath that you will be faithful to the Constitution. Yeah. And I had to take a constitutional class. Even though I've taken a Constitution class, I had to take another one. It was awesome. So yes, very real and very personal to me at the moment. What other oaths have we made? Testifying in court, absolutely. Yeah, being a witness. Yeah.
So when you work for some jobs, you have to pledge that you won't sell their secrets.
Yeah, some jobs, NDA, might have you sign a non-disclosure agreement. Yeah, Jane.
I told AT&T that I will pay my phone bill every month.
AT&T, you're going to pay your phone bill. Yeah, it's kind of important if you want to use your phone. Yeah. If you don't pay your bill, not just with AT&T, but really with any company, if you don't do that enough, phone companies in general will stop providing phone service. So yeah, that's a credibility issue. Any other oaths? One I used to hear from my sister a lot was, if you tell mom and dad, I swear to God, I will not drive you home. She was older. I was dependent. I didn't tell mom and dad. What other oaths? Signing a mortgage, yeah. It feels like the bank owns you for a little while, doesn't it? Building anything, yeah. We had to sign a mortgage. It was not my favorite. Any other? Oh, yeah. And for an automobile? Yeah. Yeah, those dealers want to own you as well. They own you until you make your last payment. How many of you have heard the term, on my mother's grave? Right, like it lends just gravity to whatever is going on. And so we have this context in which Jesus is talking about some really, really political things. And we have these sort of everyday, more mundane commitments that we make. When I was a student at Point Loma, they made us sign a covenant that we wouldn't drink. Some may or may not have broken that covenant when they were there. I wasn't a pastor yet, so I plead the fifth. But as we think about all of, baptism. What a covenant that is, huh? Yeah. To be known and recognized in the community and to be held accountable by that same community and to pledge to other people to help them be faithful. What a huge oath, promise. Yes, that is. And we have all of these competing oaths and pledges and promises in our lives. And then Jesus comes in and says, what's a polite way to say this? Cut the crap. Be honest about who you are and what you're committed to. Make hard choices. And be honest about how and why you're doing the things that you're doing and to whom these decisions may impact. Because a lot of these oaths that we make don't just impact us. Like, sure, I may be not credible, but that impacts my spouse, my children, my job, my community. And depending on the scale or your authority or your reach, that impact can be pretty big. We can think of politicians of every stripe who say, I will not, or I will, and then they get the authority, and then they do, or they don't. And it really doesn't matter what party you're a part of. It's not to say that all grievances are the same. I do not want to make a false equivalence. But it's really clear when somebody says one thing and then does something else, that there's a disconnect. And whether or not you want to associate with that or be a part of that is a choice we have to make pretty consistently. So when we read this kind of a passage, it's really easy to say, okay, tell the truth. But what Jesus is saying is tell the truth even when it might cost you something. Even when it may mean persecution or exile or abandonment or imprisonment. First, be people who trust and follow what God has given you to trust and follow. I'm going to give you an example, and this might feel or be a little bit controversial, and I do and don't mean it to be. I do mean it to be in the sense that it's a very explicit example, and people will be polarized about it. What I don't mean to say is that everybody has to make the same choice that I made. This is, I believe, a matter of commitment and conscience. And so the example that I'm about to give is not for everyone, but it's how this particular passage impacted me and a choice that I had to make. I grew up, and I was a really impressionable age. I was in elementary school, late elementary school, when the first desert storm happened. And I, like many of my peers, saw nothing but sort of war propaganda. I mean, there's a lot of war that happens now, but there's nothing like the war that they showed on TV in the 80s and 90s. Like, you just saw it all the time, and it was pretty raw. Like, they just had like war reporters in the field showing explosions, showing munitions, and the call consistently was to be a good American. You answered this call, right? And then the sort of second half of that, under the next Bush administration, when we went back to Iraq, there was sort of this really sharp division. And I was like high school, college at this age. And there was this really sharp division. And I remember we did such silly things as stop calling potatoes that were sliced and fried French fries. We called them freedom fries. You remember that? Right? Like, there was just this, like, you're either in or you're out. You're either one of us or you're one of them. And I just remember feeling like, what if I don't think that shooting someone else is my Christian duty? I don't know them. I And it was just like a really complex thing. But I also thought, like, violence is kind of being rained down on some people. And I really had to wrestle with what it meant to be first faithful to my commitment to love my neighbor. To protect my neighbor? Is that part of love? And how do we do that? And what tools do we use? And it wasn't simple, and it's not easy. And again, what I'm about to share with you is not because this is the only way that people can be faithful. But what I did is I went to our church headquarters and I registered as a non-combatant. And I said, I may be drafted. It may be that my duty as a citizen of this country requires me to participate in service, but that service cannot be to kill someone else. That was a choice that I made because I thought it's what it meant for my yes to be yes. That my yes to follow the God of peace meant I had to also be a person of peace, even if it meant that I might, my spouse might, my children might, friends and loved ones might have violence inflicted upon them. It's a tough choice. It's a choice that I would still make. It's a choice that some of my friends have actively dismissed or made other choices. And we've remained friends and siblings in Christ. They've understood their yes to mean something different, and it's manifested in a different way. But it was a very real choice that I had to make that I believe impacts me and my neighbor. And we make these kinds of choices all the time. And we read passages like this and we dismiss them as simple or simplistic or not really impacting how we live every day. But I honestly would encourage you this week to just go through what are all of the commitments that you have in your life. Who are all the people in institutions, however small or big they are. You may not even have agreed to be a member of those institutions. I think of citizenship as one of those things. You did not agree necessarily to be a citizen wherever you were born. They just said you were born here. So you are one of us. And you must do as we say. I really struggle with that. Some people don't. Some people love it. I think about the reverse. I was born in a family that's Catholic. And I think, I was born Christian. I was baptized as a baby. I've never not been a Christian. I've never not been in this family of faith. And in that instance, I love it. And other people really struggle with that. Oh no, you got to kind of choose this Jesus stuff. You got to choose to be a member of the faith. So it's not really simple and it's not really clear all the time. And these commitments go back and forth, and we oath and we promise and we say yes and no, actually quite a bit. And actually every day. So what does it mean for your yes to be yes and for your no to be no? What does it mean for people to trust us and for us to really wrestle with that credibility part, but not at the expense of the loyalty part? Of the who gets to decide when it's really, really tough what faithfulness looks like. I wish it was easy. I wish it was clear. But one of the things that I do know is that this passage calls us to examine. One of the things it does not do is it does not require us to confess everything to everyone. That, I think, sometimes people read this passage and they say, well, now you got to go home and tell everybody everything that you've been thinking. That is not true. Please don't do that. Please don't tell everybody what you think of them. Please don't tell your boss how you feel about them. Unless you love your boss. In that case, please do. I'll leave with one sort of philosophical note. There's an ethicist named Immanuel Kant, and he sort of gave language. This idea has been around for a long time. Plato and Aristotle and lots of others have wrestled with this, but he gave this language of a categorical imperative. You may have heard that before if you've taken a psychology class or an ethics class. But basically what that means is that for something like telling the truth means you always have to tell the truth in every situation. It does not matter the cost. It's a category of good and evil. To tell the truth is good. To not tell the truth is evil. And then you watch something like Andor, or any of the Star Wars universe pieces, and you're like, oh, people lie a lot. And the good guys lie a lot in this. And I'm kind of rooting for the good guy. But they tell a lot of lies to get to the good part. Or if you want to think about what's happening in the US, you really have to think about if someone were to knock on your door and ask about the immigration status of your neighbor. What does it mean to be faithful in that situation? Who do you protect? And at what cost? Do we have, when we read these words of Jesus, a categorical imperative to be truth tellers? The big one when I was in college was, what would you do during World War II if you were hiding someone in your home? That seemed like a clear and obvious thing. But now that we're talking about the US and we're talking about people who may watch our kids or care for our lawns or build our homes or be married to us or be the parents of our children or be our parents or work next to us in an IT capacity. Oh man, this categorical imperative reading of Jesus is really, really tough. Because it really impacts people now. We've really got to wrestle with what it means to hold an oath and to whom we hold that oath and when and why we apply that oath. What does it mean to be a good citizen? Does it mean everybody has constitutional rights? Or does it mean that when those in authority show up, you obey? Not easy questions for us to answer, but certainly Jesus is calling us to examine who we are and why we are that way. And like I said, I don't have many answers other than be faithful. Be faithful to what you know to be true and right and good. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Let your commitment to put God first require you to put God first. And it's okay if you mess up. I'll just say that. Because you will mess up. We've all messed up. The disciples, in the moments leading up to Jesus' death, were messing this up. They were swinging swords and denying following Jesus, not showing up at the cross, doubting whether or not he was raised. It's okay. We will mess this up a million different ways. But the challenge is always to continue to come back and to re-examine what are we saying yes to and what are we saying no to.